Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called The Hunter, written by Kai Dobson. It had been 40 cycles since the Ithclick had heard of rumors about the Hunter. The details about whatever it really was remained somewhat linear, in spite of the varied individuals and species that had supposedly been abducted and returned by it. It was a bipedal alien, similar to the physiology of the Vinsta, and supposedly from a distant arm of some galaxy that had yet to be explored by the coalition of species, or even the Federation of sci-fi, even though they were closer to where this hunter was supposed to belong to. There were too many suppositions concerning the hunter's legend for Yu's liking, and so he scoffed at the mentions of it by his 4 young children when they brought it up to scare each other. His eldest had finally begun to understand her father's skepticism, and was turning her own opinion around to his on the matter. But after that night they both would revert right back to their childhood fears on the subject. As he had done for many years, on the second day of the new month, Ithclick had taken a wander down to the local emporium to see what new wonders had been brought from the outer planets and beyond. The prices could range from a few clips of platinum, or a whole bar, or even some cases, all depending on the rarity and demand for the item, of course. A whole 5 bricks. The most expensive thing Ithclick had ever bought from the emporium was worth half a brick, a tube twice as height as the buyer that was cascading waterfall of fluid and light. But the height was not what made it so expensive. The lights from within came from opal stars that floated and flew around in the mysterious liquid found in a faraway alien planet that softly lit the center of the spiral staircase in Ithclick's home. His life partner had not been impressed when he had returned without the half-brick of platinum he had left with. But when she saw what that half-brick had bought, she sat up all night, just staring. Ithclick and the children had joined her, and they were soon all sleeping soundly, bathed in the pale but seemingly restorative light that the opal stars gave out. The night, however, would not be Ithclick's usual perusing of the store's wares from distant lands that he would never get to see, but rather one that he would spend the rest of his life trying to convince people had really happened. However, a detail that would work in his favor is that he did not have to convince people he faced it alone. His eldest daughter was with him. Ithurana had occasionally gone with her father to the emporium since she was able to walk on her own 4 feet, and would make her own travels there with her friends to look over what there was to buy with her own hard-earned platinum clips. This night she had almost skipped to her parents' home to go with her father, as she had heard there were more than the usual trinkets available, and she had hoped to get something for her own home that would rival the Opal Star light show in her parents' home. Their route took them through their local parkland. It had been nothing more than a field when Ithclick was born, but through an excellent political maneuverings of the local aldermen, it had become home to nearly 1,000 trees that ranged in color and size and beauty. The plain grasses had made way to shade and security, and many small animals returned to the area and had blossomed along with the wildflowers that were planted soon after. The pair chatted about their time spent apart as they walked, and soon came into a clearing amongst the forest where a harsh lightning storm had felled 2 entwined trees several cycles ago, when suddenly Ithurana realized there was more to the clearing than there usually was. Before she could mention it to her father, a dazzling light blinded them, and their bodies were instantly bound with a thick carbon rope and pulled harshly upwards towards the light. Within moments the light was gone, as was its source, and the 2 Wayu were gone with it. They awoke, whether it was moments later, or minutes later, or even hours later, they could not tell. But the father and daughter were awake almost simultaneously, and immediately knew they were in some kind of trouble. They were aboard a ship with artificial gravity that was stronger than what they were used to at home, and Itharia was struggling to breathe given the way her legs were crumpled underneath herself. A movement in the doorway drew Ithclick's eye, but all he could see was a dark, shadowy shape with no distinctive features. He could not tell who it was or what species the ship belonged to. There were not that many to choose from, but being an engineer of infrastructure had hardly put him in the same place as an interplanetary spaceships. The being seemed to tilt its head at the pair as if the rana began to wheeze, her 4 air sacs unable to fully inflate to nourish her body. The shadowy figure raised an arm, not a tentacle, which ruled out 2 species this critic could think of, to a panel, and a small beep was heard as the dial was spun. The gravity in the room immediately lessened to a more manageable level, and Ithurana's legs shot out from under her, and she finally took a full, deep breath. "Thank you," Ithclick said to the being, but whether it could understand was another matter. Even though the coalition of species and the Federation of Sciatia had each been around for more cycles than one could count, it did not mean that they met easily or often, given the distances between their systems, and the distance between their galaxies. Each of the 2 alliances was nothing more than a paper-based friendships. There was no major trade between systems, unless they were close, but space is called that for a reason. There's lots of space in between places. As Ithclick checked on his daughter, the shadowy being moved and grabbed something from the table behind it, and then it came back to the doorway. Another beep from a button, and the force field door shimmered slightly, and the being entered the room, and both Ithclick and Uthurana could see just what had taken them. It was bipedal, taller than them both by a hand, almost bounced across the floor, which could only mean the gravity on its home planet was far stronger than the planet that Wiyu called home. It wore a mask, which Ithclick took to mean that the gases he and his daughter needed to breathe were no good for their abductor. But all of the pieces of the puzzle had been putting together about the being in front of them gave him a cold chill throughout his body that he had never felt before. It was a hunter. "Are we going to die?" Ithurana stuttered her whispers to her father, and she came to the same conclusion. "Be still, my youngling," he trembled, as the hunter drew closer to him. The hunter bent down and grabbed Ithclick's arm and brought it upwards to observe. A digit from the hunter's hand traced slightly up and down Ithclick's arm until a vein rose up to the touch as was normal. The hunter moved his left arm around to his back and brought a large syringe and slid the needle into the raised vein and started to take some of the green that ran through Ithclick's body. "Father!" Ithurana started, but a quick shush from Ithclick silenced anything more. The hunter took the needle out, and Ithclick pressed on the needle mark, and he watched as the hunter swapped the cartridge from the syringe and replaced it with a new one, empty one. The bipedal hunter floated over to Ithurana and motioned for her to give him her arm, so he could do the same as he had done to his father. "Do not be afraid, my daughter," Ithclick said calmly. "Just do it." Ithurana raised her arm, and soon the needle was gone from her arm. The hunter left the room through the shimmer and pressed the button once again to enforce it, to make sure the 2 did not try to escape or attack him from behind. Back on his usual gravity, the hunter walked over to the machine and inserted the cylinders into it, draining the blood. "Doesn't want our blood for sustenance," Ithurana whispered again to her father. Ithclick did not know, and so remained silent as he and his daughter watched the strange alien wait for the machine to be done with their blood. After several tense minutes, the machine made a harsh noise, and the hunter punched it and yelled in clear frustration. Even with the divide of species and languages and customs, it was obvious that whatever the hunter had wanted the machine to say, it had said something different. The hunter looked back at the 2 in his custody and marched back purposely towards them. Ithurana whimpered and cowered behind her father, who knew that he could not do much against a member of a species that could easily move in such a harsh gravity, and so he resigned them both to whatever fate may lie before them. The Wiyu felt the ship move, and Ithclick saw that the hunter was controlling it from a device on its wrist, a very advanced piece of technology from somewhere else in the universe. When the ship seemed to be settling down into the landing, the hunter moved back into the room and hauled Ithclick up to his feet. The bear then picked Ithurana up from the floor, and soon the Wiyu were being dragged along a corridor, still filled with air breathable to them. At the end of the corridor, bay doors began to slide open to show the Wiyu at the edge of the forest, where the hunter had first abducted them. The hunter threw Ithclick out first, sending him tumbling down the short ramp before sending the young female down after him. The pair slowly got to their feet, but the ship didn't move. The hunter was just standing there, watching them, as Ithclick put his arms around his daughter and shielded her, as if there was some more to come. The hunter put a hand to his mask and paused for the briefest moments, before removing his mask that covered his unknown features. His hair was dark, and it matched both the top of his head and the roundish chin. His eyes were an icy blue that stood out even over a distance. The hunter's skin was smooth and uniform in colour, a matching beige just like his hands. But his face was all that Ithclick could stare at. He was clearly unhappy. Whatever the machine had said, it had not been what the hunter wanted. That was obvious, and that he had been so rough in removing the wheel from his ship meant that he did not intend to hang around for long. Ithclick held the hunter's stare for as long as he dared before he looked away, his heart beating so hard. Even Uthrana felt it. The hunter's eyes darted from the male to the female. Wiyu at the base of the ramp before him, when he started to point at his chest and said one word in whatever language he spoke. Human. Even without a shared language, Ithclick knew it was either the name of the hunter himself or its species. So he replied by repeating the gesture, first at his own chest, and then at Ithrana's. Ithclick, Ithrana. He then moved his hand between them and his daughter. Wiyu. The hunter nodded and tapped the device on his arm, and the ship started to rise, and the bay doors closed, the ramp slowly disappearing into it. The two Wiyu watched in disbelief as the ship disappeared into the night sky before they ran home and alerted the family to the night's events. As Ithclick took charge of regaling their tale to his life partner and the neighbour, he could not help but shiver at the thought of what else could have happened. He's supposed to be a myth, a story, to scare the younglings into going to sleep, all tucked up safe in their bed instead of letting them run around at night, disturbing the adults. Yet I saw him. We both did. He is no myth, no legend, no lie. He is real. He is dangerous. He is not finished. When the local watchman was summoned, the duo repeated their story again, and again when the counsellor was summoned, and once again when the alderman was brought from his bed. All of the local officials with some form of power came to their house that night, and some documented the pair's story to update the coalition on the knowledge that now the Wiyu had met the mythological boogeyman. The morning came, and Ithclick had barely slept. His mind was racing from just how scared he had been, but the journalists who came did not care. They offered his family bricks of platinum to tell their story exclusively on their channel. The question that kept on being asked that night was why them? Why those two Wiyu, and not the alderman or someone more important? Ithclick thought hard about the answer, and when his interview was brought out to the whole world on a live broadcast, he finally answered. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Caspar Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.